He didn't just tell her to leave. He pointed at the exit of the family grocery store he claimed his father built with his bare hands, slapped divorce papers on the counter in front of his staff, and ordered his wife out like she was a thief caught on camera. Customers stopped mid-aisle. Phones came up. Employees froze. "Sign them," he shouted. "You're done here. Get out of my family store." His mother stood behind him, satisfied. His mistress, who he introduced as just the new accountant, rested a gentle hand on his arm, pretending to comfort him while her eyes burned holes through his wife. He thought he was exposing a criminal. He thought he was protecting his family's legacy. He thought he was kicking out a broke, disloyal wife who should be grateful he ever married her. What he did not know was that the woman he kicked out in front of his family, his mistress, his staff, and even the local news cameras, was the silent billionaire who secretly owned 51% of that very store and every branch with its name on it. The family investor his father begged for? The mysterious company called Reed Holdings that had saved them from bankruptcy? The money that quietly paid off their debts, their loans, even his college tuition? That was her, the wife he threw away. He walked out that night believing he had destroyed her life. He didn't realize he'd just declared war on the woman who could legally take his entire empire back with a single signature. He thought the cameras were there to film his victory. They were really there to film his biggest mistake. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch this without subscribing, it's like standing in that store and letting Emma's voice get shouted down all over again. When you hit that subscribe button, you stand with every person who was thrown away in a place they helped build. So subscribe now, and in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. Because today, you're about to see what really happens when a man kicks out his wife, unaware she's the billionaire who owns his family store, and what she did next. The clatter of metal shutters breaking the morning silence hit like thunder. The grocery store, Reed's Market, woke before the sun. Workers hurried through the aisles, stacking bread, arranging fruit, sweeping the floors still cold from night air. Amid the noise and movement, Emma Reed, 32, stood at the center of it all, calm, focused, radiant in quiet strength. She wore a plain beige cardigan, her hair tied loosely, and a smile that made the younger staff straighten their backs. Emma wasn't the kind of woman who raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence carried authority wrapped in kindness. Everyone knew if Emma stepped onto the floor before opening, things would run smoothly. "Make sure the oranges are rotated, Tom," she said gently, watching a teenage worker scramble to fix the display. "Customers always pick from the top. The ones underneath go bad faster." Tom flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reed." Emma shook her head, bending down to help him. "Don't apologize. Just remember next time. Every mistake is how we learn." That was Emma. Patient, understanding, never cruel. The staff adored her. To them, she was the boss's wife who treated them like people, not tools. What they didn't know was this. The woman kneeling next to a crate of oranges could have bought the entire chain of stores 100 times over if she wanted to. As she straightened the boxes, a memory flickered. Her younger self at 18, hands raw from washing dishes in 3 different diners, just to save enough to pay rent. She'd slept on bus benches, studied business from free library books, and launched a tiny online shop selling handmade soaps. That shop turned into a company. By 27, Emma Collins, her maiden name, sold her first startup for millions. She'd gone from sleeping on benches to sitting in boardrooms. But when she met David Reed, a charming man from a proud family who ran Reed's Market with his father, she never mentioned it. She wanted love, not recognition. And when his father, Charles Reed, spoke with that quiet, old-world pride about keeping the family business alive, Emma made herself smaller, always. She let them believe an anonymous investor had saved them during the worst years. She was comfortable being the invisible backbone, not the visible crown. David, 35, entered the store just then, his stride confident, shirt crisp, the faint scent of expensive cologne trailing him. To the workers, he was Mr. Reed, the boss, the man who built the family business. To Emma, he was still, somewhere under all the changes, the man she had once believed in more than she believed in herself. He walked over, kissed her cheek lightly and glanced at his watch. "You've been here since dawn again?" Emma smiled. "Someone has to make sure things are ready before customers arrive." David chuckled. "You're too dedicated, Emma. My mother says you work harder than the staff." "I like being useful," she replied softly. "This place feels like home." He smirked, amused by her simplicity. "One day you'll own the place." That line made her pause. It was meant as a joke, but deep down it wasn't far from the truth. Her company, Reed Holdings, already owned controlling shares of the market, hidden behind layers of trust funds, shell corporations, and a private agreement Charles had insisted stay confidential for the sake of David's pride. On paper, the majority shareholder was Reed Holdings. In reality, Emma Collins Reed signed the checks. No one, not even David, knew. A supplier called just then. Emma answered, switching easily into the tone of someone who'd handled high-level calls for years. "Yes, this is Emma. The payment will come from Reed Holdings, same as usual," she said quietly, glancing at the handwritten ledger kept next to the register. The old accountant, now retired, had always booked those payments as capital support, Reed Holdings, silent investor. To anyone who bothered to really read the notes, the explanation was there. David never did. She hung up. David frowned slightly. "Reed Holdings? What's that?" Emma hesitated only a moment before replying smoothly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance she had built. "Oh, that's the name the supplier uses on their billing now. They merged last month, remember? I told you." It was an effortless lie, layered over a truth too complicated and too dangerous to her heart to share. She had learned to tell those kinds of lies the way other people learned recipes. David shrugged and reached for a cup of coffee an employee had just handed him. "You always handle these things so well. I don't know what I'd do without you." She smiled faintly. "You'd find a way." For a fleeting second, their eyes met, and the old warmth was there. Memories of late-night dinners and shared dreams before the distance crept in. Before his mother's disapproving comments and the slow, steady erosion of trust she couldn't quite put her finger on. Then David's phone buzzed sharply on the counter. His hand darted to it instantly. He read the screen, and a quick shadow crossed his face. Emma caught the change, a flicker of guilt too brief for anyone else to notice. "Who's that?" she asked casually, still arranging the oranges. He forced a chuckle, sliding the phone into his pocket before she could glimpse the name. "Just business. A client asking about invoices. You know how it is." But he didn't look at her when he said it. Emma's gaze lingered on him. Years of dealing with investors and negotiators had taught her something simple. People lied more with their eyes than their mouths. Outside, the delivery truck rumbled in, jolting the air with diesel fumes. The employees hurried to unload crates, their laughter returning the rhythm of morning life. Inside, though, Emma felt the air change, just slightly like a calm surface trembling before a storm. She turned back to the shelf she was fixing earlier, her fingers brushing a cracked label on a jar of honey. Fix the small things before they break completely, she thought. She lived by that rule in business and in love. Behind her, David glanced at his phone again. Screen dimmed, a name glowing faintly before it disappeared. Tessa Lane. Emma didn't see it, but the audience did, a quiet seed of tension planted deep in the calm. As the store doors opened and customers began to enter, Emma's smile returned, steady and bright. But beneath it, something new stirred, an unease she couldn't name yet. And as she walked past David, a cold draft swept through the aisle, brushing against her arm like a whisper. "Every mistake is how we learn," she'd said earlier, but she hadn't yet realized. This time, the mistake wasn't hers. The silverware clattered against porcelain like quiet thunder. Laughter burst from the far end of the table. Too loud, too forced. The Reed family dinner was in full motion, but beneath the glow of the chandelier, something uneasy pulsed like static in the air. Emma Reed sat at the middle of the long dining table, surrounded by people who still felt like strangers, despite 5 years of marriage. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, but her heartbeat wasn't calm at all. At the head of the table sat Margaret Reed, David's mother, sharp-eyed, commanding, wearing the air of someone born to be obeyed. She adored her son, tolerated Emma, and had little patience for anyone she considered beneath their family's legacy. Charles Reed, David's father, was absent tonight, too tired, according to Margaret. He'd been stepping back from the store for years, retreating into his study and letting David lead. Emma had always suspected Charles knew more about the mysterious investor behind Reed's market than he let on, but he never quite met her eyes when finance came up. "Let's all thank Tessa," Margaret said brightly now, raising her glass. "If it weren't for her, this store's books would still be a mess." The woman sitting across from Emma, Tessa Lane, late 20s, polished with a smile too smooth to trust, looked down shyly. Something about her face tugged at Emma's memory, like a file half remembered in an old cabinet. A different hairstyle, a different office, a forgotten HR report. The familiarity brushed the edge of Emma's mind, then slipped away when Tessa spoke. "Oh, Mrs. Reed, it was nothing," Tessa said sweetly. "Just a few accounting corrections." Emma's fork froze midair. Tessa. There it was again, the name she'd seen flash across David's phone earlier that day. David had mentioned her once. "A talented new accountant I hired 6 months ago." Back then, Emma had been in and out of meetings with suppliers and the bank, trusting David completely with the hiring. Trust had been her default setting. David laughed lightly. "Mom's right. Tessa's been a lifesaver. She's smart and efficient." The word efficient stung more than it should. That was the same word David used to describe Emma when they were newlyweds, back when he still looked at her like she was the most capable woman in the world. Emma swallowed the ache and smiled politely. "That's wonderful. It's always nice to have reliable staff." Tessa gave a quick nod, her eyes lowering just slightly as though hiding something. The camera of the story's attention lingered on her wrist, a bracelet glinting in the light, gold, slim, engraved with tiny initials, D&E. Emma's gaze locked on it. Her chest tightened. That bracelet wasn't just similar, it was identical. On their 3rd anniversary, Emma had given David a matching set, one for him, one for her. The inside of his was engraved D&E, the inside of hers E&D. David had lost his months ago, shaking it off with a laugh. "It must have slipped off at the gym," he'd said. Emma had believed him. Now on Tessa's wrist, the bracelet sat at the same angle David always wore it, and there, near the clasp, was the tiny scratch Emma remembered. The one from when David banged his hand against a shelf while they were restocking during Christmas rush. She'd teased him about hurting the jewelry more than himself. Her stomach dropped. Before suspicion could take full shape, Margaret's voice cut through the silence again. "Emma, dear, you've been helping in the store too, right? Maybe you can learn a thing or two from Tessa's system. You're good with the staff, but finances take a special touch." It was meant as advice, but the undertone was clear, a gentle humiliation, a reminder that Emma's place was supportive, not equal. David reached for the wine bottle, pouring Tessa a glass before Emma could even ask for one. "She's right, honey," he said casually. "Tessa's got a sharp mind for business. You should see the reports she's put together. They're impressive." The laughter around the table resumed, but Emma didn't hear it. Her mind drifted, not to jealousy, but to numbers. To the quiet transfers she'd authorized from Reed Holdings to support the store. To the notes she'd written for the old accountant, explaining clearly, these are capital injections from the majority investor. Had Tessa seen those records? How had she chosen to interpret them? Emma placed her napkin gently beside her plate and took a deep breath, forcing composure. "I'm happy to hear the store's doing well," she said softly. "That's all that matters." Margaret nodded approvingly, mistaking Emma's calm for meekness. Across the table, Tessa caught David's eye. A silent smile passed between them, quick, careful, but unmistakable. Emma noticed. Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the napkin tightened. The air in the room grew heavier. The chandelier lights seemed too bright now, almost mocking. To break the tension, Margaret began telling a story about David's childhood, how he once stood up on a chair and declared he'd make the Reed name the biggest in the county. Everyone laughed. Emma joined in politely, but her mind kept circling back to that bracelet, that look, and the faint unease from that morning's hidden phone call. When dessert arrived, the laughter had dulled. Tessa leaned slightly toward David, whispering something. He chuckled softly, unaware Emma was watching. When he turned to refill his glass, the collar of his crisp white shirt shifted slightly. And there it was, a faint mark. Soft, smudged, lipstick. Emma's stomach dropped again. She blinked once, twice, unable to move. It wasn't her shade. Emma hardly ever wore lipstick, and when she did, it was a muted rose. This was deep red, Tessa's color from the party photos and from earlier that evening. The table blurred around her for a second, voices fading into distant hums. But then she caught herself, straightened her shoulders, and smiled as if nothing happened. Years of boardrooms and negotiations had taught her how to keep her face still when her world trembled. Her mind screamed, "Not here, not now, not in front of his mother." David glanced her way. "You okay?" "Of course," she said smoothly. "Just thinking about tomorrow's orders. We're low on honey again." He nodded, unconcerned, returning to his glass. Emma's hand brushed her throat. Her pulse thudded, matching the quiet tapping of the clock on the wall. The sound seemed louder now. She looked around the table, his mother beaming, Tessa glowing, David relaxed, and Emma silent, observing, remembering. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the dining room mirror, calm, collected, unbroken. But her eyes, those eyes carried fire no one noticed yet. Dinner ended with goodbyes and laughter. David placed a light hand on her back as they walked to the car. "You were quiet tonight," she smiled faintly. "Just tired." It was technically true. She was tired of ignoring what she saw. He nodded and started the engine. In the quiet of the car, the street lights swept across his collar again, that red mark glowing faintly in the light before fading into shadow. Emma turned to the window, her reflection looking back at her like a stranger. "Every mistake is how we learn," she whispered, echoing her morning words. Then softly, almost to herself, "Let's see what I learn next." The pounding rain against thin glass sounded like gunfire. Lightning flashed through the single window of Emma Collins' tiny apartment, 5 years earlier, before she became Emma Reed. She sat on the floor surrounded by open files, invoices, and glowing screens. The power flickered, but she didn't move. Her fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, coding line after line, numbers rolling like thunder on the monitor. The intensity in her eyes said one thing. She was fighting to survive, not to win. The clock struck midnight. She leaned back, exhausted, rubbing her temples. Outside, the city lights blurred in streaks of orange and white. Inside, her small desk overflowed with papers stamped with the name of her tech company, E. Collins Innovations. "Come on," she whispered to herself, eyes fixed on a progress bar on the screen. 97%. 98%. Complete. Then, success. She exhaled, laughing quietly in relief. That single upload meant her company's acquisition deal was final. The last 2 years of sleepless nights and borrowed money had paid off. Her phone buzzed. On screen, "Congratulations, Ms. Collins. The sale is official. $48 million transferred to your trust account." She stared at the number for a long moment, not smiling. Instead, her hand trembled slightly. It wasn't joy. It was disbelief. A knock at the door pulled her back. She opened it to reveal Laura Green, late 40s, her assistant and closest confidant. Laura was the only person who knew Emma's truth, a quiet woman with sharp instincts, loyal as steel. Laura stepped inside, shaking off her umbrella. "You did it, Emma. You actually did it." Emma smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel real." Laura sat beside her, noticing the untouched dinner on the counter. "It is real. You could walk away now. Start anywhere. Build an empire from scratch if you want to." Emma closed the laptop slowly. "Maybe, but I'm tired of building things that don't feel like home." Laura frowned. "Home? You have money, freedom." "Money doesn't hug you when you're scared," Emma said quietly. "It doesn't look at you like you matter. I've built companies. I don't want another logo. I want roots." She stood, walking to a small wooden box on the dresser. It was smooth, hand-carved, and etched with her initials. EC. She opened it carefully and placed several envelopes inside. Bank certificates, legal ownership papers, and a document titled Acquisition of Reed's Market Chain, 51% ownership. Laura's brows lifted. You're buying into the Reed family stores? They're struggling. Emma, old-fashioned, full of pride, barely staying open. Their son runs the floor, but the numbers are brutal. That's why, Emma said, her tone gentle but firm. They remind me of the life I never had. Family working together, caring for something that matters. I want to help them, quietly. Laura shook her head. You're helping strangers with millions of dollars, and you don't want them to know it's you? Emma smiled softly. People act different when they know you have money. Suddenly, every thank you has a price tag. I just want to belong, not be owned. Lightning flashed again, lighting her face. Determined, calm, but lonely. Laura crossed her arms. And when they ask who's behind the investment? I'll form a holding company, Emma said. Call it Reed Holdings. Laura blinked. You're naming your company after their family? Emma nodded. The bank's broker showed me their file. The store's been in the Reed family for decades. I want the structure to feel natural to them. Reed Holdings will sound like part of their history, not an outsider taking over. Laura hesitated. You know their son, David, thinks he's the one keeping the business alive. Won't it bruise his ego when he finds out he wasn't the savior? Emma's gaze softened as she closed the wooden box, locking it with a tiny key. That's why he won't find out. Charles Reed signed the agreement. The documents keep the majority investor's identity private. To the staff and to David, it'll just be a silent partner. Laura exhaled slowly. That's smart, risky, but smart. On the lid of the box, Emma wrote in delicate black ink, For when they forget who I am. The thunder rolled again, and the lights flickered, but Emma's face stayed still, steady, resolved. Laura watched her closely. So, what happens now? Emma looked toward the window, the rain streaking down like falling glass. Now, I stop surviving and start living. Laura tilted her head. Does that mean you'll tell anyone about who you really are? A soft smile crossed Emma's lips, sad but sure. She turned to Laura and whispered, Not yet. I'll tell someone when I trust they'll see me. Not my money. Laura nodded slowly, realizing what Emma really meant. Then, another buzz from Emma's phone. A new message. A name appeared on the screen for the first time. David Reed. She froze for a moment, reading the message aloud. Hi, I'm David from Reed's Market. I heard about your work helping small businesses secure investment. Our store is struggling. Could we meet? Laura smiled knowingly. Looks like the universe just gave you a reason to stay. Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed back slowly. Sure. Tomorrow at noon. She hit send. Outside, thunder cracked again, louder this time, as if the world already knew this simple meeting would change everything. Emma closed the wooden box, slid it under her bed, and whispered to herself, Maybe this time, I'll find home. The camera lingered on the wooden box beneath the bed, the faint sound of rain masking the soft hum of fate moving into place. Then silence. Her phone buzzed once more, unseen, as the screen flashed with a second message from David. You'll recognize me. I'll be the one wearing a red tie. The sound of applause filled the air like thunder. The Reed's Market anniversary celebration was in full swing. Balloons, lights, banners, and a small stage at the front of the store where the Reed family stood smiling for photographs. Local reporters moved through the crowd, gathering footage for a small-town success story segment about the beloved family-owned market that had beat the odds. Emma Reed stood beside her husband David, her smile poised, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She'd planned every detail of the event, the decorations, the speeches, even the small gold pins every employee wore that read, 5 years strong. This was supposed to be a proud day, a family milestone, but something about the way David's eyes kept darting toward Tessa Lane, their accountant, sent a chill crawling up Emma's spine. Tessa, dressed sharply in a red dress that matched David's tie, the same color he'd worn the day they first met, hovered just close enough to make the air between them heavy. David's mother, Margaret, stood near the cake table, beaming proudly at her son. A true Reed, she announced to anyone who would listen. Built this business with his own hands. Emma's heart squeezed at that. The truth, her truth, was that her investments had saved the store from bankruptcy years ago. But she'd never said a word. Charles Reed, older now, leaned quietly on his cane near the back. He said little, his eyes tired. Every time someone praised David for rescuing the store, Charles's gaze slid briefly toward Emma, then away again, weighed down by the secret he'd agreed to keep. Emma didn't care who got the credit. She cared about keeping the family whole. "David," Tessa whispered quietly behind him, handing him a folder, the corners sharp from overstudying. "Now's the time." He looked at her, uncertain. She nodded, her expression a careful blend of concern and encouragement. Emma noticed the exchange but brushed it off as work-related. Tessa had been leading a deep audit of the accounts for weeks now. Emma assumed it was about tax season, vendor reconciliation, normal things accountants obsessed over, until David cleared his throat into the microphone. "Everyone," he began, voice calm but sharp, "before we continue, there's something I need to say." The crowd fell silent. Even the soft music stopped. A cameraman from the local news station swung his lens toward David, sensing drama. Emma turned toward him, puzzled. "David, what's going on?" she whispered. He didn't look at her. Instead, he opened the folder Tessa had given him and held up a stack of printed documents. "These," he said, "are our store's financial statements, and they show something very disturbing," the employees murmured. Margaret frowned, her grip tightening around her champagne flute. David's eyes burned with false confidence, but beneath it, an insecurity Tessa had been feeding for weeks. Late-night calls, quiet whispers about irregularities, carefully chosen screenshots from the accounting software. "Over the last year," he continued, "large sums have been moved out of our operating account into an entity called Reed Holdings. Transfers authorized under my wife's login." Emma froze, the name hit her like a slap. Most of the staff had heard of Reed Holdings only as a vague, silent partner, a line on ownership paperwork they never really paid attention to. Tessa had carefully framed it differently to David, a suspicious shell company using his family's name. "David," Emma said softly, stepping closer. "Let me explain." He cut her off, voice rising. "Explain what? That you've been using my family's store as your personal bank?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tessa stepped forward, pretending to hesitate. "I didn't want to say anything," she said, voice trembling just enough. "But when I reviewed the shareholder distribution reports and saw those transfers, without any corresponding board resolutions, I knew something was wrong. I told David he needed to see the truth." Emma stared at her, realization dawning. Tessa hadn't discovered anything. She'd deliberately left out the context. Those transfers from Reed Holdings were part of the original capital injection and the standard profit-sharing agreement Charles had signed with the majority investor, her. But on the surface, twisted the right way, they looked like skimming. "Tessa," Emma said firmly, "you're showing them half a story. The full agreement?" David slammed the folder on the counter. "Don't lie to me, Emma." His voice echoed through the store. "You used my family's name to steal from us." Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "That company isn't some stranger's shell, David. Reed Holdings is a way to hide what you're doing," he snapped. "You think because you smile and help on the floor, no one will look at the numbers?" The crowd whispered. Cameras from local news flickered, devouring every word. Margaret put a hand to her mouth, pale with shock, clinging to the story that protected her pride. That they were the victims, not the ones who had been saved. Emma's chest rose and fell, her mind spinning. She had every document that could prove her innocence, showing the capital she'd injected, the signed agreements, the clauses that made Reed Holdings the rightful majority owner. But not here. They were locked away at home, in a wooden box she hadn't touched in years. Tessa moved closer to David, her hand brushing his arm. "You don't have to do this here," she said softly, eyes wide and faux concerned. "We can handle it privately." David shook his head, gripping the microphone tighter. "No, she did this here. She'll answer for it here, in front of everyone she lied to." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope. He threw it onto the counter. "Divorce papers." Emma stared at them, her breath catching. "You're no wife of mine," he said coldly. "Get out of my family's store." The silence that followed was suffocating. The cameras zoomed in. Some employees lowered their phones, ashamed. Others kept recording, unable to look away. Emma's hands trembled as she picked up the papers. Her mind screamed to fight back, to shout the truth, to drag Charles forward and force him to admit who had really signed what. But she saw the way they all looked at her. Doubt in their eyes, whispers in the corners. Hope that the story was simple, that the quiet, rich wife was the villain, and the proud son was the hero. Her heart cracked quietly. She turned toward David, tears threatening, but never falling. "One day you'll regret this," she said, voice low but steady. He scoffed. "The only thing I regret is trusting you." Tessa slipped her arm around his, resting her hand there gently, like claiming territory. Cameras flashed again. The image of the betrayed wife and the proud husband would spread before the day ended. Emma looked past them, her eyes landing on a framed photo hanging behind the counter, the family portrait she'd paid for years ago. David, his parents, and her, smiling together. The light caught the glass frame, glinting sharply. Something inside her shifted. Her sadness hardened into resolve. She turned slowly toward the crowd. "Enjoy your celebration," she said quietly. "You've just witnessed the biggest mistake David Reed will ever make." Gasps followed her as she walked out, each step steady, her dignity intact. Behind her, David's voice wavered as he called for security to make sure she leaves the premises. But she didn't look back. The head of security hesitated. He'd seen how much she'd done for the staff, but one look from Margaret sent him walking toward the door anyway. Outside, the wind whipped across the parking lot. The banner fluttered behind her, half detached, the words 5 years strong twisting in the air, as if even the fabric knew something was about to tear. Emma's eyes lifted to the night sky, her jaw set. "You took everything from me," she whispered, voice steady. "But you forgot one thing. I built this." She stepped into the darkness, the wooden box from her memory flashing briefly in her mind. The rain hit the windows like fists. Wind howled through the trees outside the small guest house tucked behind a row of tall pines, far from the main road. Inside, Emma sat on the floor, barefoot, still in the same dress she'd worn to the celebration hours ago. Mascara streaked faintly under her eyes, her wedding ring lying abandoned on the table beside a half-empty glass of water. The echo of David's words replayed in her head. "You're no wife of mine. Get out of my family's store." Every syllable cut again, like a blade being twisted. This guest house had once been her secret sanctuary, a property she'd bought in her own name before the marriage. Under a quiet trust Laura helped her set up. A place she used on days when she worked late and didn't want to disturb David, or when she needed silence to think. Tonight, it was the first place her feet had taken her when the store doors closed behind her. The main house, the one that legally belonged to the Reeds, didn't feel like home anymore. Maybe it never really had. She stared at the divorce papers, edges curled from her trembling hands. The ink was dry now, final, publicly discarded, privately broken. Her body shook once, but she refused to cry anymore. Not tonight. She stood slowly and walked toward the fireplace, the only light in the dark room. The flickering glow washed over her face, revealing a storm of exhaustion and fury beneath the calm. For a long minute, she just stared into the flames, breathing, remembering. A flicker of the past surfaced. David at 25, laughing over coffee, broke, hopeless, telling her he'd never finish college because he couldn't afford tuition. She'd quietly paid his fees through an anonymous scholarship fund, her fund, never telling him. Then another flash, his parents panicking years later when the store nearly went bankrupt. She'd wired the money from her private company, Reed Holdings, saving them. David thought a silent investor had stepped in. He never asked who. He never looked deeper when numbers magically worked out. Emma pressed her palms against her face, her breath trembling. "I built it all," she whispered, voice shaking, "and they used it to destroy me." She turned sharply, almost running to the wardrobe. From its bottom drawer, she pulled out a familiar object, the small, hand-carved wooden box. When she married David, she'd brought very few personal things into the Reed home. This box, however, never left her control. When the main house began to feel less like hers, she moved the box to the guest house, telling herself it was for safety. Now she understood it had been instinct. Her fingers brushed over the engraved initials, EC, before opening it. Inside lay neatly folded documents, ownership deeds, share certificates, and account transfers. Proof that Reed Holdings owned majority control of Reed's Market and 4 other stores in neighboring towns. Proof that the silent investor, David mocked, had been his own wife all along. The truth glimmered under the dim firelight. She hadn't lost everything. In fact, she still owned it all. She sank onto the rug, spreading the papers around her like a map of memories and power. Her voice dropped to a whisper, calm but cold. "You used my money to build your pride. Now I'll use my silence to break it." The room seemed to tighten around her words. For the first time that night, she smiled, not out of happiness, but clarity. She reached for her phone, her fingers steady now. A single number sat saved in her contacts under the name Laura Green, her former assistant, now a lawyer who still handled Emma's hidden trusts and holding companies. Emma hesitated for one breath, then hit call. The line clicked. "Emma," Laura's voice came through, sleepy but alert. Emma's tone was calm, ice beneath velvet. "Prepare the files. I want the annual board meeting for Reed Holdings moved up." Laura went silent. "The one scheduled for next month?" "Yes," Emma said. "Turn it into an emergency session. I want full agenda control, and I want every document related to Reed's Market ownership on the table." Laura's breath caught. "Emma, you're sure you want to pull that trigger? Once we send those notices, David and his family will see the corporate structure. They'll know exactly who they've been dealing with." Emma stared into the fire, her eyes glowing with its reflection. "They already decided who I am without knowing the truth. It's time they meet the woman they tried to throw away." She paused, then added, "Make sure corporate counsel sends the official email tonight. Subject line clear, something they can't ignore." Laura's lawyer brain kicked in. "Emergency board session, ownership clarification, mandatory attendance." A small, grim smile touched Emma's lips. "Perfect." She hung up before Laura could reply. For a moment, only the crackle of fire filled the room. Emma gathered the documents, placing them back into the box and locking it tightly. Outside, thunder rolled, deep, echoing, like the sound of something waking. She stood by the window, rain tracing down the glass, her reflection clear in it. Calm, beautiful, dangerous. "You wanted me gone," she murmured, voice low, "but you forgot I still hold the keys." Lightning flashed, illuminating her determined face. Somewhere across town, in the office David had claimed as his kingdom, his laptop chimed, a new email sliding silently into his inbox, its subject line glowing. "Emergency board session. Ownership clarification. Mandatory attendance." He wouldn't understand it yet. He'd probably laugh it off at first. Emma watched the storm outside, the faintest hint of a smile returning. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was repositioning. The morning sun streamed through the wide glass windows of Reed's Market office, bright and golden, a cruel contrast to the chaos that had torn through it the night before. The anniversary banners were gone, the cake table cleared, but the tension lingered like smoke after a fire. At the large oak desk sat David Reed, freshly shaven, dressed sharply, and smiling as though nothing had happened. The deep ache in his chest from last night's confrontation was still there, but he pushed it down and wrapped himself in a fragile armor of victory. Across from him, Tessa Lane perched confidently on the edge of the desk, her red dress from the party replaced by a white blouse and sleek pencil skirt, polished, powerful, and smug. The papers from Emma's public humiliation were still scattered across the table. David pushed them aside with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Finally," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Peace." Tessa smirked, sipping her coffee. "You mean victory," he chuckled. "Same thing, isn't it? Emma's gone. The store's mine again. My family's reputation is clean." Her lips curled. "And your wife?" David leaned back, satisfied. "Ex-wife. Those papers were signed in front of everyone. The court will process it. It's a formality now. She doesn't have the money or the courage to fight back. That sentence made Tessa's eyes flash with dark amusement. She knew more than she let on. She knew Emma was not the fragile, broke woman David wanted to believe she was. But letting him underestimate Emma was convenient. She stood walking slowly around the room, tracing her fingers along the polished desk. "It's strange," she said softly. "Emma always seems so composed. Like she knew something no one else did." David laughed, the sound a little too loud. "Emma was simple, kind-hearted, yes, but naive. She doesn't have a scheming bone in her body. She'll cry for a few days, then disappear." Tessa smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what people do when they're hurt." He ignored the warning in her tone. He needed to. The alternative, that he might have just made a catastrophic mistake, was too big to consider. She stopped by the shelf where the family photo used to hang, the one Emma had framed years ago. It was gone now, replaced overnight by a mock-up logo design pinned to the wall. Lane and Reed Market. David's chest swelled with pride. "You like it?" Tessa tilted her head. "My name first?" He winked. "You earned it. The woman who exposed a thief deserves recognition." The satisfaction in her expression hid the deeper motive burning beneath. Because years ago, long before she walked into Reed's Market, Tessa had worked under a different name at Emma's old company, E. Collins Innovations. Back then, she was just Tessa Green, a junior data analyst with too much ambition and not enough ethics. She'd been caught stealing confidential trade data, trying to sell pricing models to a competitor. Emma had quietly fired her without pressing charges, telling HR to give her another chance at life somewhere else. No public scandal, no police, just a door closing. Tessa never forgot the humiliation, never forgave it. Reinventing herself as Tessa Lane, she'd rebuilt her career in finance and accounting. When she discovered through an old contact that Reed's Market's mysterious investor was linked to a past Emma Collins, she saw the perfect stage for revenge. Now, seeing Emma destroyed, in front of the very family she had saved, felt like perfect symmetry. She crossed her arms. "We should hold a press conference next week," she said casually. "Tell the world we're rebuilding stronger than ever." David nodded, already imagining headlines that glorified him. "We'll rebrand everything under Lane and Reed. My mother will love it, keeps the family legacy, adds a fresh face." Tessa smiled. "A fresh face," she repeated softly. "That's one way to put it." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it briefly. A notification from a private email where she'd been quietly forwarding company reports to a third party interested in Reed's supplier contracts. Not yet, she thought. One enemy at a time. David poured himself a drink, still basking in his illusion of power. "Even if Emma tries something," he said dismissively, "the store's in my family's name. Those silly documents she keeps won't matter." Tessa's eyes flicked to him, curious. "Documents?" He shrugged. "She always kept a box of business stuff at the guest house. Old contracts, certificates, whatever. She said they were just personal records. I never cared enough to look." Tessa smiled faintly. "Still, you should be careful with her. People like that, they remember." He waved a hand. "Please, she's done. I ended it clean." Just then, his laptop chimed. A new email notification appeared at the top of his screen. Subject: Emergency Board Session. Ownership Clarification. Mandatory attendance. From Corporate Counsel, Reed Holdings. David laughed. "Look at this. Some technical glitch. Probably fallout from last night's stunt with the accounts." Tessa leaned over his shoulder to read it, her smile slowly fading. "It's from Corporate Counsel, David. That's not a glitch. Reed Holdings is your silent investor, remember? If they're calling an emergency session, someone's pulling rank." But David only chuckled, brushing it off. The idea that anyone could outrank him in his own story was something his mind refused to accept. "Probably a mistake. Some legal formality. I'll deal with it later. The lawyers love their drama." Tessa said nothing. Her eyes stayed on the screen, narrowing ever so slightly. The words ownership clarification felt like a shadow creeping under the door. For the first time since the party, a flicker of uncertainty touched her expression. The camera lingered on the subject line again. Ownership clarification. glowing faintly in the morning light. Outside, the store's sign creaked in the wind. Probably a mistake, David repeated, but deep down something in his gut twisted, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. The heavy glass doors of the Reed Holdings boardroom burst open with a sound that sliced through murmurs and whispers. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. There she was, Emma Reed, no longer in soft pastels or gentle smiles. Today she wore a black tailored suit that fit her like armor. Her hair was swept into a sleek bun, her heels clicking against the polished floor with quiet authority. Beside her walked Laura Green, her former assistant, now a sharp, confident lawyer, holding a thick leather folder. Laura's presence signaled something very simple. This wasn't a plea, it was a takeover. The board members, mostly older men in suits, two outside investors, and Charles Reed, shifted uncomfortably as Emma entered. On one side of the long table sat David, jaw clenched, and beside him, Tessa Lane, pretending confidence but fidgeting with her bracelet. Corporate counsel Ms. Harlan stood at the far end, a stack of printed notices in front of her. She had been the one to send the email that morning, at Emma's instruction. David's smirk faltered. "What are you doing here?" he asked, forcing a laugh. "This meeting's for shareholders only." Emma stopped at the end of the table, her gaze sweeping over everyone before resting calmly on him. "That's exactly why I'm here," she said. "I'm the majority shareholder." The room fell silent. Tessa's lips parted slightly. "She actually showed up," she whispered under her breath. David blinked, confusion flickering into disbelief. "What are you talking about? You don't own anything here. This is my family's group." Emma turned to Laura. "Show them." Laura opened the folder, spreading documents across the glossy surface like playing cards in a high-stakes game. Bank transfers, signatures, stamped ownership certificates, all neatly organized and cross-referenced with corporate law notices. "These," Laura began clearly, "are records showing that Reed Holdings, a company founded by Emma Collins before her marriage, purchased a controlling 51% interest in Reed's market group 5 years ago. The agreement was executed with the knowledge and consent of Charles Reed, who signed as representative of the Reed family." She gestured toward Charles. A low gasp rippled through the room. David's face paled. "That's impossible. Reed Holdings. That's not me," Emma finished calmly. "Under my maiden name, Collins." Her voice was steady, soft, but carried through the room like thunder rolling under silk. All eyes turned to Charles. His shoulders sagged as the burden of 5 years of silence finally pressed too hard to hide. "I did it to save the business," Charles said quietly. "We were drowning. Emma's company offered a lifeline. The condition was privacy. I thought we'd tell you when you were ready to handle it." David stared at him, betrayed. "You knew? You let me believe I saved this place?" Charles looked down at his hands. "You did work hard, son. But the money came from her." The reality crashed into David all at once. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the slow tick of the wall clock. Tessa shifted in her seat, eyes darting from David to Emma. You can't just walk in here and take credit for everything," she blurted. "You're his ex-wife." Emma's gaze flicked toward her. "Actually," she said calmly, "I was your employer once." Tessa stiffened. "You worked for E. Collins Innovations under the name Tessa Green, didn't you?" Emma continued. "Until you were fired for theft." Tessa froze, color draining from her face. She hadn't expected Emma to connect the dots so quickly, or to expose her in a room like this. Emma smiled faintly. "Don't look so surprised. I remember everything you stole and everything I forgave. I chose not to press charges then. Today I'm not inclined to be so generous." Corporate counsel cleared her throat gently. "For the record, Ms. Lane, your failure to disclose that conflict of interest while serving as the company's accountant is a serious breach of fiduciary duty." The board members murmured, tension rising like smoke. David slammed his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. Even if this is true, you can't control the company. My name is on every wall, every document. My family built this store." Emma's calm didn't waver. "And my money kept it alive. Every debt you thought you repaid, every mysterious investor who saved you." That was me. The woman you humiliated. A short montage flickered in their minds. The wired funds, the quiet contract signing, the years of Emma at the store before dawn while David played the hero. The truth landed like a storm no one saw coming. David's jaw clenched, his confidence cracking. You? Emma stepped closer, cutting him off with her calm, measured tone. You kicked me out of my own business in front of your family, your employees, and your mistress. You told me I was nothing. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Now let's talk about who's leaving. Gasps echoed through the boardroom. Ms. Harlan, the counsel, slid one final document across the table. Per the shareholders' rights, she announced, and with the majority stake represented by Ms. Collins, there is a motion on the table to reaffirm Reed Holdings as the controlling shareholder of Reed's Market Group, to suspend David Reed's authority as CEO pending formal removal for gross misconduct, to initiate an internal audit into recent accounting practices under Miss Lane. She looked around. All in favor? Hands rose one by one. Even the outside investors, who had no emotional loyalty to David, lifted theirs quickly. Charles's hand trembled as he raised his two, guilt and relief mixing in his eyes. David's world shrank. Emma didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence was the power she'd promised herself she'd use to break him. Laura slid another document toward David. Effective immediately, she said. Control of Reed's market assets returns to the legal owner, Emma Collins, operating under Reed Holdings. Your role, if any, will be determined based on the findings of the internal audit and subject to board approval. David's hand trembled as he picked up the paper. His name printed below hers in smaller letters. No longer the head, but a footnote. He looked up at her, eyes burning. You planned this. Emma met his gaze evenly. No, David, you planned it for me. The moment you chose to believe a lie without asking me for the truth. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. 5 years of love, betrayal, and regret condensed into one silent exchange. Then Emma turned away, gathering her documents. Meeting adjourned, she said quietly. She walked toward the door, her heels echoing with finality. As she reached for the handle, the faint sound of her phone vibrating in her pocket broke the silence. She glanced at the screen, and for the first time since she entered, her expression shifted. Message, anonymous tip. Check company account activity. Urgent. Her eyes narrowed. The calm composure cracking just slightly. Someone was watching more than just David. It's not over yet, she murmured under her breath. The courthouse doors slammed open, echoing through the marble hallway like the sound of judgment itself. David Reed stumbled out, his face pale, his once perfect tie hanging loose. He clutched a stack of papers in his shaking hands, the official divorce decree, stamped and signed. Behind him, Emma walked calmly, her lawyer Laura Green at her side. Today she wore no wedding ring, no trace of the woman who once believed this man would protect her. Reporters swarmed at a respectful distance, stopped by court security, but their cameras flashed and their voices rose like a wave. Mrs. Reed, is it true you now control Reed's Market Group? Did your husband really accuse you of theft with falsified information? Is there any chance of reconciliation? Emma didn't answer. Her silence was colder than any denial could ever be. She simply kept walking, heels clicking against the polished floor, head held high. At the courthouse steps, Laura handed David one final document from a separate envelope. Here, she said flatly, divorce decree granted. All claims of embezzlement and theft have been dismissed as baseless, and your accusations are formally recorded as unfounded. She paused, letting the words sink in. And Mr. Reed, she added, following yesterday's Reed Holdings board session, you are no longer authorized to act as CEO or spokesperson for Reed's Market Group in any capacity. Any statements you make about the company going forward are purely personal opinion and may expose you to liability. The words struck like a hammer. David's shoulders slumped. Emma glanced at him briefly. He looked smaller now, his arrogance stripped, his pride collapsing under the weight of his own actions. Outside, the sky was bright and clear, but to David it felt gray. Emma, he started, voice breaking, you have to believe me. I didn't know. Tessa, she said you... Emma stopped. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she turned slightly, her voice calm but cutting through him like glass. That's exactly the problem, David. You never cared to know. She didn't raise her voice, but it carried the weight of everything he'd destroyed. The nights she'd saved his family in silence. The chances he never gave her to explain. She turned and walked down the courthouse steps, her figure steady and regal. David stood frozen, the papers trembling in his grip as the wind tore one free, the page fluttering across the street like a final goodbye. Inside Reed's Market Group headquarters, the boardroom was packed again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. A unanimous vote echoed through the room. Motion to remove David Reed as CEO of Reed's Market Group for gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. Seconded. All in favor? Every hand rose. David sat motionless at the table's edge as the decision was finalized. He had been invited only because his employment contract required notice of termination. The actual power shifted around him, unbothered by the man who once thought he was irreplaceable. Then Laura stood, reading the next resolution. Effective immediately, the new CEO of Reed's Market Group will be Ms. Emma Collins. There was a deliberate pause before she added, previously known as Emma Collins Reed. The board erupted into applause. The cameras flashed as a few official photographs were taken for internal records. Emma stood tall, composed but not gloating. As she stepped forward, a staff member quietly removed the David Reed, CEO nameplate from the door and replaced it with a new one. Emma Collins, Chief Executive Officer. In the main lobby, workers smiled as the old portrait of Emma and David was taken down. In its place, a new image appeared. A simple, powerful graphic. The company's logo beneath a quote that read, "Built on integrity, led by strength." Meanwhile, security escorted Tessa Lane out of the building. Her lipstick was smeared, her expression twisted between rage and disbelief. "This isn't over," she snapped, jerking her arm away from the guard's gentle grip. "I know things. I have copies." Emma watched from her office window as Tessa was led away, her voice fading down the hallway. "No," Emma murmured softly. "It's just finished. For you." She had already instructed IT to audit all recent access logs and freeze any suspicious activity. Any data Tessa had stolen would be traced, and any buyer would inherit a legal storm. Later, when everyone else had gone, David lingered in the boardroom, sitting in silence. The office that once felt like his kingdom now seemed like a stranger space. Emma re-entered quietly, holding a small brown envelope. "These belong to you," she said, placing it on the table. Inside were photographs, their wedding day, their early years, smiles that once meant forever. David looked up at her, eyes wet. "Emma, I didn't know how much you did for me." Her expression softened, but only for a moment. "That's what love looks like when you don't deserve it," she said simply. She turned toward the door, pausing once more as he whispered, "Can you ever forgive me?" She didn't look back. "Forgiveness isn't my gift to give anymore." With that, she left the room, the sound of her heels fading into finality. David sat alone as the office lights dimmed, staring at the empty seat across the table, the one that once belonged to the woman he'd thrown away. Outside, Emma walked through the corridor, sunlight pouring over her like redemption. Staff greeted her with smiles and quiet respect. For the first time in years, she felt peace, not from revenge, but from clarity. Still, as she reached her office, her phone buzzed with a single message. Unknown number. "Congratulations, Ms. Collins. But are you sure everyone on your board is loyal?" Her smile faded just slightly. "So the game isn't over," she whispered. The crowd roared like a rising storm. Flash bulbs exploded from every angle. Reporters jostled for position, their microphones extended like weapons toward the woman at the podium. Emma Collins stood under the grand banner stretched across the storefront that once read Reed's Market. Now bold new letters gleamed beneath the morning sun. Collins Market Group. Her calm face reflected in the glass behind her, composed, regal, untouchable. Inside the crowd, whispers spread like wildfire. She was the real owner? She built everything? He accused her of stealing? The truth had detonated across social media overnight. Leaked documents from the board meeting, legal filings clearing Emma of any theft, and a viral clip of her being thrown out of her own store had been shared millions of times. News outlets called it the Reed scandal, the wife discarded like a criminal who turned out to be the billionaire founder behind it all. Emma lifted her chin as cameras zoomed in. For years, she began, her voice clear and steady, this company was presented as a family-run business, a story about loyalty, hard work, and community. But somewhere along the way, those values were lost. She paused, letting the words settle. Today, she continued, we begin again. Not as Reed's Market, but as Collins Market Group. Because the name Collins stands for what actually built this business: hard work, integrity, and quiet strength. She didn't need to say my name for everyone to understand. Applause erupted. Even some former employees who once doubted her now cheered, their guilt replaced by admiration. Behind the crowd, David Reed stood in the shadows across the street. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken. He hadn't slept in days. Every news report, every online article tore at what was left of his pride. When a reporter spotted him, the shouting began. David, is it true you accused your wife of theft without evidence? Did you know she owned the company all along? Were you aware of your accountant's past misconduct? Was the affair real? The questions hit like bullets. David froze. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. The cameras closed in, and flashes blinded him. Emma turned slightly, her gaze meeting his across the crowd. For a moment, silence fell again. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, once partners, now opposites. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her expression said what her words didn't. This is what your choices built. David broke first. He turned and pushed through the reporters, stumbling as microphones followed him. The crowd parted, murmuring, "That's him, the husband who threw her out." When he reached the parking lot, his phone buzzed. He looked down at the name flashing on the screen, Tessa Lane. He hesitated, then declined the call. Inside a nearby cafe, Tessa sat with her makeup smeared and eyes red from crying. She tried again, whispering into the phone, "David, please answer. We can fix this." No response. She stared at her reflection in the window, the same woman who had once smiled beside him, promising forever. A memory flashed, her voice in his office weeks ago. "We'll run this together forever." Now she whispered to herself, voice breaking, "Forever's over." She dropped the phone onto the table, tears glistening as she realized she was just another chapter in his downfall, not the co-queen she imagined. Back outside, Emma continued the press conference. The employees stood proudly behind her, the same people who once watched her be humiliated. They saw her differently now, not as a quiet wife, but as a leader who had endured and triumphed. Emma's lawyer, Laura, handed her the next announcement sheet, but Emma folded it, choosing instead to speak from her heart. "I learned something through all this," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. "Being kind doesn't mean being blind. Forgiveness has limits, and dignity has no price." The crowd erupted again, clapping, cheering, filming. She stepped down from the podium as cameras kept flashing, shaking hands, hugging workers, smiling softly at faces that once looked at her with pity. Then a small hand tugged gently on her sleeve. It was Maya, the young daughter of one of her employees. Her big brown eyes looked up at Emma with admiration. "Miss Emma," she said shyly, "my mommy says you're the bravest lady in the world." Emma knelt, her expression softening. She brushed the child's hair back gently and whispered, "Always be kind, sweetheart, but never be blind." The girl smiled and ran back to her mother. Emma straightened, watching her go, a symbol of the innocence she once carried and lost. As the crowd began to disperse, her phone buzzed again. This time, no name appeared on the screen, just a blocked number. She frowned, stepping away from the noise to answer. "Ms. Collins," a voice said quietly on the other end. "You don't know me, but there's something you should see. It's about your company. Someone inside is selling your trade data." Emma's expression changed, calm replaced by focused intensity. "Who is this?" she demanded. The line went dead. She stared at the phone, her reflection caught in the black screen. The woman who had already conquered one betrayal, now standing at the edge of a new war. The rooftop door swung open with a gust of evening wind. The sun was setting over the horizon, painting the sky in gold and soft pink. Below, the bustle of the city faded into a hum. Emma Collins stepped out onto the rooftop terrace of Collins Market Group, the very building that had once been her quiet battlefield when no one knew who truly owned it. Now it was her fortress of peace. The wind caught her hair as she looked down at the glowing sign newly installed on the storefront. Collins Market Group. It gleamed proudly against the sunset, her name, her legacy, her rebirth. Behind her, the faint sound of laughter floated up from the employees gathering below. The company's staff were celebrating their reopening, the first official day under Emma's leadership and the new brand. Food trucks lined the parking lot, kids chased each other between cars, and employees who once whispered about her now toasted to her. On the terrace railing sat a single coffee cup, her favorite mug from years ago, the one she used to share with David in quiet mornings before the chaos began. She had pulled it from an old box in storage earlier that day, unsure why she kept it. She picked it up, tracing the faint chip on the rim with her thumb. For a brief moment, her eyes softened. The memory of that peaceful beginning played in her mind, two people laughing over burnt toast, dreaming of building something together. But dreams, she had learned, only survive when both hearts are true. She placed the cup down gently and turned her gaze back to the horizon. Inside the store, new shelves, freshly painted walls, smiling employees greeting customers. The community returned slowly at first, then in waves. People who had once called it Reed's now practiced saying Collins with pride, many of them having watched Emma's story unfold online. In the staff lounge, a framed quote hung on the wall: "Kindness is strength, but blindness is weakness." A visual echo of her words from the press conference. In a dim apartment across town, David Reed sat surrounded by half-packed boxes. His once flashy suits were crumpled on the bed. The news played softly on the TV, Emma's face on every channel, praised for rebuilding the company that had nearly collapsed under his pride and poor decisions. He stared at the screen as the anchor's voice said, "Business leader and investor Emma Collins, the visionary founder and rightful owner of Collins Market Group, has transformed scandal into a story of accountability and empowerment." David muted the sound. For the first time, there were no excuses left, no one to blame. Just silence. And the realization that the woman he betrayed had saved him more times than he ever deserved. He opened a drawer, pulling out a photograph of their wedding day. His thumb brushed across Emma's smiling face. He whispered to himself, "You were always enough. I just couldn't see it." He placed the photo in a box and sealed it shut. Somewhere in a small rented office, Tessa Lane stared at an email from an anonymous address, one she thought she controlled. Attached were the logs of her unauthorized data exports, forwarded back to her with a simple subject line: "We see you." She slammed her laptop shut, realizing Emma hadn't just reclaimed the company. She'd quietly closed every exit, too. Emma leaned against the railing, eyes reflecting the fading sun. Laura stepped out quietly, holding a thin file. "Everything's finalized," she said softly. "The rebrand is legally complete. The lawsuits against Tessa's buyers are filed under seal, and the last legal ties to David are dissolved. You're free." Emma smiled faintly. "Free," she repeated, almost testing the word on her tongue. Laura hesitated. "You did the impossible, Emma. You won, and you didn't lose yourself doing it." Emma turned toward her, voice calm but heavy with meaning. "Winning isn't about revenge, Laura. It's about remembering who you are when the world tries to make you forget." Laura nodded, understanding there were battles ahead, the anonymous warnings, the hints of betrayal on the board, but also knowing that Emma was no longer the woman who would shrink from those shadows. "I'll leave you to your view," Laura said, and slipped back inside. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint sound of children laughing from the street below. Emma looked down to see Maya, the employee's daughter, waving up at her with both hands. Emma smiled and waved back. Then she spoke softly, almost as if to herself, her voice the final narration of her journey. "I spent years trying to prove I was enough. Turns out I already was. I just needed to remember who I was before they forgot." As she spoke, the scene dissolved into a montage of renewal, employees smiling as they clocked out, customers thanking her, the community rebuilding stronger than ever. Her voice continued, gentle but powerful. "Pain taught me patience. Betrayal taught me boundaries. And silence taught me strength." She picked up her coffee cup once more, took a sip and gazed at the glowing city below. Her empire, her peace, and yes, her next set of challenges. The camera slowly pulled back, capturing her silhouette against the last light of day. The rooftop lights flickered on, surrounding her with a warm golden glow. She turned toward the rooftop door, pausing for one last look at the skyline. The reflection of the store's new sign shimmered in the glass beside her, her name bright and unbroken. She smiled softly, whispered to herself, "New chapter." Then she walked away, her heels echoing on the rooftop floor, the sound of closure, not escape. As the door closed behind her, the camera lingered on her reflection for a beat longer before fading to black. But just before the screen went dark, a quiet notification sound chimed from her phone on the table. Message: "Congratulations, Ms. Collins, but there's more to your legacy than you think." Emma's unseen voice echoed softly as the scene faded out.